panel member has just arrived, so we better make a start, hadn't we? So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Publishing Futures, where we are looking at the business model. The mood of our business, our whole industry, has changed over the last couple of years. Rewind a couple of years, and there were a lot of traditional magazine publishers who felt that they were about to become roadkill on the information superhighway. Go back just a couple of months and the mood has actually changed a lot in the intervening period. We've been researching that, we being Wessendon Marketing, we've been researching that through a project in association with PPA called Publishing Futures, where we survey executives who work within the publishing business as to their feelings about what is actually going on. And the mood has really changed. There is a sense that a lot of real opportunities have opened up, but there is also great stress in turning those opportunities into reality. But I'm galloping ahead a little. I'll introduce very quickly. We'll come back and give a little more profile. We're going to be talking to a stellar panel of publishing executives. James Tighe from Dennis, Mike Suter, CEO of Shortlist Media, and Adrian Barrick from UBM. We'll be coming onto them in about 10 minutes' time and talking through some of the issues which emerge from the Publishing Futures project, which I want to spend the next few minutes just talking about briefly as an introduction. We call the Publishing Futures project a near futures project for two reasons. Firstly, that it is based on what industry insiders are saying about their own business. So it isn't external consultants commenting from the outside. And secondly, our time perspective is only 2 years out. There is benefit in blue skying and looking further out into the future, but this project is about what insiders are doing with their own live businesses over the next couple of years. The fieldwork took place just before Christmas. It was a self-completion online questionnaire which polled the views of 121 publishing companies. There is information on the Wessendon site and on the PPA site about the project, and there is also a Publishing Futures live event which takes place at the end of March 27. It's a half-day workshop where we drill into more of the details about the survey, about the report. If you want information about that, grab me afterwards or email info@wessendon.com and we can tell you a little more about that. It's a public first-come, first-serve event. We have been approached by a number of companies who want something tailor-made in-house for their own staff, for their own management team. Again, if you want to talk about that, then grab me afterwards. But it is a half-day session because it is a very big survey. In the survey, we go around all those different departments looking at the key issues in each of those areas in turn and how they impact on the centre, current performance and future prospects, where the business is actually going. That's the survey sample, the 121 companies, a mix of consumer and B2B, print and digital, and with a few newspapers mixed in there as well, regional and nationals. So 121 companies producing over 5,000 brands across print, online, digital editions, mobile, and live events. So they are representative in terms of their size of the complete publishing industry, but they are, I call it self-selecting by attitude. People who are about to go bust aren't going to partake in this particular project. So it tends to be the more successful, the more profitable, the more go-ahead companies who have taken part in this survey, but it gives a key indication as to what is happening at the leading edge of our business. A few top-level figures. In terms of turnover, if we go back, and this is the third annual survey that we've done, if we go back to 2009, the market was very clearly in decline in turnover terms. Looking at the figures at the end of 2011, and the sample were saying that their average turnover growth was plus 4.2%, with a slight acceleration going up to 5% in 12 months' time by the end of the year. That's positive, and it's all going in the right direction, but it's not as positive as people thought in last year's survey. Last year's survey, they were predicting a 7% turnover increase, and it's actually come in at just over 4%. So the anticipated revenue rebound, particularly in advertising revenues, hasn't materialized as strongly. It's very variable from sector to sector, and it is clearly fragile, but there is still real growth there. In terms of profits, 70% of the companies claim to be in profit currently. The average across those profitable companies is for pre-tax profits to be just under 12% of turnover. By the end of the year, another 16% of those companies anticipate to be in profit, with an average predicted margin of 10.4%. So again, positive, but what the profit figures reveal is an increasing polarization between the weak and the strong. Those who are doing better in profit terms than the stronger ones, and that gap is clearly increasing. Head count, it is clear that 2008 was the real year when publishing companies bore the pain of headcount reduction. Headcount has gradually and slowly been increasing, but there's a slowdown this year. In the latest survey, 45% are predicting growth over the coming 12 months in terms of staff numbers. That's lower than in last year's survey, when it was 32%. So the optimism of last year's survey has cooled a little. Where there is a real change is what people are actually doing. There's a real change in focus and mood, and shifting from pure cost cutting onto trying to develop the new platforms and the new revenue streams. Now all that feeds through into overall confidence levels. How does your current level of confidence about the financial future of your company compare to how you felt a year ago? And again, this is cooling down, which is seen in the overall scores. So a score out of 10. Last year it was 6.9. So last year it was 7.1. It's now dropped slightly to 6.9. So still positive, but a slight cooling of last year's optimism. Very quickly, this is the core of the survey, and I'll zap through this at high speed. We've got two charts there. This is for consumer magazines as to where is your revenue coming from now in percentage terms, and that's for consumer magazines, where own print brands, so print is still accounting currently for 82% of consumer magazine publisher turnover. That's going to drop to about 74%, so a significant drop. And digital rising from 8% up to 15%, so a very significant increase there. And if we have a look then at the B2B picture is much more digital. Digital already currently is just under 17%, is predicted to increase to 24% of total turnovers being pure digital in 2 years' time. So the B2B market leading the digital drift, the digital change. So print is declining, but it's still the engine room of many, particularly consumer publishers' operations, and an area where better margins are still to be seen. There is a move, and something we'll quiz the panel about, from ad revenues, a very slow one, from ad revenues into user revenues, and that's a very conscious strategic decision for a number of companies. Digital is overall growing. Again, there is a slight shift into user revenues, but it's still very much an ad-funded advertising and sponsorship model with very modest e-commerce in the consumer magazine side. Consumer magazine publishers haven't cracked yet the e-commerce side of digital publishing. Customer publishing is there in both streams as a nice add-on. That's rapidly shifting into digital. And extensions, the last category, is a very broad one. It covers live events, which are growing in consumer magazines as well as in business. Live events, reader services, data services. So a number of different things and different trends going on there. But just to pull together a few thoughts with some quotes, from the latest survey from a consumer magazine publisher, we're feeling a bit overwhelmed and a bit breathless that our main challenge is how to keep pace with everything that is going on. And again, one of the questions I think for the panel is about organization. How do you build the skills and the knowledge and the experience within your organization to handle those changes? The print-digital crossover. Future hit the headlines a couple of weeks ago by saying that for the first year, their decline in print products has been outweighed by the gain that they have made in digital. For the first time, digital has compensated for print. So where is this? I mean, there isn't going to be a crossover for newspaper publishers, I don't think. I think they've completely stuffed their business model long term. But that digital crossover point, where is it for many of these publishing operations? And the big question, will digital be as successful financially as we hope and need? Here is an interesting one, and I think this is going to lead into the panel session, as the CEO of a consumer publishing company, about being more positive and bold and having a clearer vision to communicate to the rest of the organization as to where the business is actually going. So to pull together the changing mood, I think 2 years ago it was very much panic and doom, caught in the headlights of the digital juggernaut that was hurtling towards the roadkill stuck in the middle of the motorway. Last year, the mood had changed to more of a stressed anxiety of there being too many choices, too many decisions as to where to put resources. Now, it is much more of a slow and grinding clawback. There is still stress, there are still big decisions to be made about resourcing, and the anticipated revenue bounce back has cooled into a clawback. But there is a sense of things being fast and experimental, of new skills, new platforms, and new opportunities. So if that is our intro, let's move on to the panel. Going into a bit more detail, James Tighe at Dennis Publishing. Dennis, I think I would sort of characterize as innovative and streetwise and adventurous, but very pragmatic in the way that they operate, who have done a lot of very smart things digitally in specialist consumer. Mike Suter, who heads up Shortlist Media, the award-winning publisher of Shortlist and Stylist, and a digital product called Emerald Street. So we'll come on to that in a moment. And then to have a B2B voice, we have Adrian Barrick from UBM Built Environment, which sounds very exciting indeed, and Connect. So an award-winning publisher and editor with 24 years of experience in B2B, and chair of Project Caxton within UBM, which is an intriguing project which we'll perhaps come on to in the panel session. But perhaps I can go back to that quote. There is a sense coming through the survey that a lot of publishers feel as though they're making it up as they go along and dressing it up as being experimental and tweaking the variables. But going through, and just as an intro for each of you, perhaps starting with you, James, as to what your vision for Dennis actually is, or are you making it up as you go along?
Well, clearly I make some of it up as I go along. No, the vision has been, I've been doing this job 6 years now, and actually the vision hasn't really changed. And the vision for the company was always, we will produce great content and supply it to our customers in whatever format they want and whenever they want it and however they want it. Now, just because an iPad comes along doesn't mean that that vision changes. That vision's the same, but it does mean you have to be technically agile. So that vision hasn't changed at all. And in fact, you mentioned, Jim, the mix of publishers moving away from ad revenue towards user revenue. Well, I look back for the last 10 years, and actually roughly, give or take 1% or 2, we've always made half our money from our readers in one way or another. Now, of course, within that half, huge amounts have changed, newsstand to subscription. But really, that's always been the case for Dennis. We've always been quite driven by our reader revenues. And the vision hasn't changed at all, but the technology clearly has.
So does that mean your underlying business model is essentially the same?
Unfortunately not. No, it's hugely more complex. So 10 years ago, we'd get a lot of money from newsstand, single copy sales, less from subscriptions, and lots from advertising. Now you have to find, each brand has got maybe 6 or 7 different ways to make money from its readers, and that is more complex and more demanding. So the business has completely changed, but the fundamentals are perhaps the same.
Okay. Can I move on to you, Adrian? Because
Sure.
B2B, very different sector altogether. My perception is B2B is several years ahead of consumer in terms of moving into digital.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, it was interesting your opening remarks. I mean, you say we're making up as we go along. I call it agility, which is one of the phrases we like to band around. Certainly at UBM, we've been through an extraordinary period of change over the last 5 or 6 years, where we've gone from, I suppose, what you could call a broadcaster of information largely through magazines, to having a network of content-rich platforms, and that includes live, obviously digital, and now smartphone as well as print. And our job really is to use those to help professional communities to flourish, and then we make money from the value that we create out of those exchanges. And as James said, that's a much more complex proposition than the old sort of print-led business. And Mike and I were chatting earlier about how simple it was in the good old days. And I think that's where the agility comes in, because you really have to be alive to what is about to change next. And there's been a huge amount of disruption from the internet. And just as we all saw it coming but didn't do enough about it early enough, I think we were very live to the fact that everything, right up to including events, which has been our strongest business model, could easily get disrupted over the next 10 years. So we exist in an environment of creative paranoia.
Right. Paranoid, does that feature in your company vision, Mike?
Well, actually, yes, I guess healthy paranoia. I suppose a little, like Adrian was saying, because we're still a start-up business, really. We've been going for about 4.5 years now, and I guess the real benefit in a start-up business is you can slightly make it up as you go along. So we try to do so in an agile way. I'll be using that phrase from now on. We've got a very clear vision for the business, which is we create surprisingly good free media for a very valuable, very mobile audience. We pretty much pioneered the idea of intervening in the audience's journeys, and that's really the kind of thing that underpins our business model. And I suppose where you would expect us to be the first people to be aware of just how much consumers' habits are changing and just how quickly. And so inevitably, digital, but really mobile digital, so the delivery of entertainment and information to people when they are on the move, will utterly reshape our future, and in the near future as well.
Right, okay. And you started with a very clear free model, although it was, again, my perception is free print with a digital add-on. Has that balance changed in terms of where digital fits in?
Certainly I guess, we're sitting here a year ago, I think I probably admitted that we were still foundering around in the shallows when it came to kind of digital innovation. We were doing quite a lot of the same things that other people were doing. I think over the last year we've really transformed in terms of our ability both to do things that are of scale and make a real difference, but also to monetize those things as well. And I think a really good example is the one you mentioned, which is Emerald Street, which has grown into a daily email of real size, which is as adored by its audience as anything else that we've ever produced, which has kind of surprised me. It's a humble email, but it does something really special. And I think that for us is the first step into a much more one-on-one form of communication. It's a first step into having a relationship with consumers that may involve at some point down the line a transaction or other. Baby steps.
Right.
But I think it's really interesting. It's the first time that I've been in a media company where I felt that there is the potential to at least start to make those jumps in a more meaningful way in a consumer environment.
I mean, it's interesting seeing what Time Out is doing, which seems to be moving towards a transactional company with with an editorial, a content platform.
Yeah.
Do you see that happening with Shortlist, with what you're doing?
I think it's difficult to see existing brands doing that, because I think existing brands, there's a sense of expectation, not only to do with kind of authority and objectivity, that means it's very difficult to be both an authority in something and to sell somebody something. So I suspect the more successful consumer brands that do that will be new consumer brands. They don't necessarily start off with the baggage and are pretty open about the fact that they are here to kind of help you make choices and to also facilitate a better deal with the choices that you make when they're consumer choices.
Yes, yeah. I mean, on that and other revenue streams, and Adrian, you've touched on this already as to how your revenue streams, that live events are becoming much more important. So can you sort of go into a bit more detail about that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of revenue streams, it's become much more pluralistic. I would say that the sort of bedrock of UBM is in its trade show business. It's our biggest revenue stream. Our annual results are out today. If anyone cares to look on the UBM website, and you'll see most of the growth has come from large events internationally. I mean, one of the things that we have really, I think, pioneered in the B2B world is what we call the geo-adaptation of events, where we have an event in one territory and then we run it in another one in a slightly different format depending on the local market. I think digitally, I wouldn't make any huge claims that we are further ahead than anybody else. It's quite hard to tell who's sort of winning in that world, but we're certainly experimenting with lots of digital models, including smartphones and tablets and so on. But I think that the main thing that we have tried to sort of move from, to pick up your use of the word transactional, I think our business, if it's to have a long-term future, is about relationships, really. That we have a close relationship with the communities that we serve. We're in the middle of them, we understand them, and we use those relationships to work out what it is that they need, and that's really the sort of bedrock of our business. And the sort of people that keep me awake at night are our direct competitors, who have always been very strong, but also what have become known as GAFA, the sort of big behemoths of Silicon Valley. And we're very, very aware that whilst we might not be very interesting to them at the moment, that could easily change over the next 5-10 years. So that's we have to be very mindful of why that we don't have a innate right to play in the markets that we're in just because we've been in them, in the case of the built environment, since 1843. We have to earn that right every year.
Right. And James, from a specialist consumer point of view, do you see much potential in sort of other add-on revenue streams, or is that around the fringes?
As consumer publishers, I'll be honest and say we've struggled to make real money from events. It's either we've not done it well enough, or the audiences we have are, we've not managed to monetize. I would say our revenue growth, and we've had 2 years of 10% growth now, mostly come from digital advertising and digital distribution. So now digital advertising is about half our advertising business. So 50% of our pounds come from digital. But we've seen a real growth in actually getting people to pay for content in a digital format as a real change for us. But no, we've not really, events probably form less than 0.5% of our turnover. It's not a strength of ours.
Okay. Now, I'm sure there are some questions in the audience. If anybody wants to ask any questions, then please stick your hands up. I've got loads more questions myself, but I can't dominate this, can I? So, pause. Anybody want to ask a question? Okay. Will you start thinking about your questions? Can we just go back to print versus digital? In one sense, it's an old debate. But where do you see print in each of your own operations? I mean, Mike, you were saying that you felt your digital developments and online were a bit slow. You still see yourself very much as print being the core and the other things revolving around that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think inevitably where our company comes from, I think, and probably the background of the people that run it, I think probably in a soppy and sentimental way, I think print probably still remains the thing that we feel that we are best at. which is why I think over the last year it's been a real journey for us to discover what we're capable of in digital and just how many of the skills that we have learned are actually transferable. I think certainly if you look at the revenue streams, even though digital would be still less than 10% of our total revenue, it's growing at an extraordinary rate. If we carry on launching and developing things in the way that we are, which means launching more standalone digital, which means launching more integrated print and digital products, which is what we plan to do, I wouldn't be surprised if in, say, 5 to 6 years' time, our ad revenues were similar to James's, to Dennis Publishing's, much more balanced.
Right. Okay. I mean, James, I don't notice from the latest ABC figures that Mac user is getting close to 50% of its. I know we'd only get you on ABC because you're.
Don't start me on that. No, about a third of its circulation is from iPad editions and digital tablets.
Yes. Okay. But do you see on certain products that shift into digital is fast?
I think to answer your original question, I mean, it really depends on the brand. So The Week is probably our biggest brand, is our biggest brand, and the readers of that magazine, of that brand, love it in a print format. It comes very, very easily to them. It arrives on a Friday night or a Saturday morning, and it's an hour to consume over the weekend, and it works beautifully in print. Mac user, or let's take Evo. Evo's a car magazine, a fast car magazine we produce. We've got a quarter of the subs now are on the iPad, because it works very well in that format. It's video-led, it works well with photos and comment with Twitter feeds. So it just depends on the brand, and probably a third of our brands are digital only now. So they're either just websites or tablet editions. It just depends on the brand. And I would have to comment on that whole print-digital divide. About 2 years ago, we made a really conscious effort to eliminate that from our organisation. So we just talk about brands now. We don't talk about print and digital. It's almost you talk about vision, and you've got to have that language statement really from the top down, because it's a pointless debate. There is no debate. Some brands work better in print, some work better in digital. But if you just think of them as audiences, as you were saying, Adrian, that's a much better way of thinking about them. So you maybe should change your questionnaire next year, Jim.
Right. Well, to pick up on your point, and actually Mike's already touched on it, perhaps I can sort of dive on to you, Adrian, is about the skills and the organisation that sit behind that, what sounds like a very attractive vision of, we talk about brands and we just distribute the information via a number of different routes. But what does that actually mean in terms of the organisation and the skills you've got?
Yeah, I mean, I think our organisation has gone through an enormous change over the last 4 or 5 years. In fact, I worked out that of the people that were in our business, in my part of the business, when I started this job as a divisional chief executive 4 years ago, only 20% are left. That's largely the sort of power of my personality, I'm sure. It's driving people to the door. But we have had to make a conscious decision to change the skill sets of the business, and there are a large number of people who've been on that journey with us who are prepared to do things in a very, very different way to what they were doing 4 or 5 years ago. And I include journalists, salespeople, marketers in that. And we've also had to bring in a lot of new skills, people like community managers, project managers, people that, for whom there were no jobs sort of 4 or 5 years ago. But because of the sort of plurality of the kind of media that we've got now, and the demands on it, we require new skills. And I think one of the things that I think is a real challenge for the industry, and it's a point I've made repeatedly within circles like the PPA, is I don't believe that a lot of the colleges are turning out the kind of people that we're going to need over the next 5 or 10 years. And particularly I'm talking about journalists. I was a journalist for 20 years, and unfortunately a lot of the kind of young talent that's coming through, very, very bright and committed people, have got too many of the old sort of print skills, and are not really thinking about the kind of jobs, or encouraged to think about the kind of jobs they're going to be doing if they join an organisation like us. I actually think it's more exciting. I'd love to be 21 again for all sorts of reasons. And one of them is, it'll be fantastic to be a 21-year-old journalist, because you get to do broadcasting, you get to do live performances, events like this, you get to travel an awful lot more than I ever did. It's a fantastic life, but you need to have those sort of skills, and you need to see value in doing those kind of things, rather than, what I was doing was a sort of gumshoe news hack. It's a very, very different kind of a world, and unfortunately, we are going to struggle, I think, for a few years while the industry adjusts to getting the right kind of people coming to us.
Okay. Pause for any questions. Anybody wants to stick their hand up? Aha. Yes, sir.
I've got a question for Mike. You've shown that the free model is viable in print. Do you think that it'll be like, with your successful distribution model, do you think it's going to be similar if you transform to digital?
Are you referring to things like tablets and so on?
Yeah.
It's a really interesting debate for us, because I think that there are some existing models for doing tablets really successfully. I think Dennis Publishing do some amazing tablet versions on iPad. For our model, I think I think you can make money from selling consumers apps. Doesn't really fit in with our culture. I think you can make money from advertisers who want to do creative solutions, things like advertorials, special bespoke packages. What doesn't quite exist at the moment is a marketplace in which there is, if you like, a display market or a spot market. So there isn't a direct comparison with the print market at the moment, where 75% of our revenues within our print business come from display advertising. 25 to 30% of them come from creative solutions, come from sponsorship and advertorials and so on. And that is around about the right way to build a business, because your spot market, your display market, is consistent. And I think if you're doing something on as frequent a basis as we are doing it, i.e. weekly, I think there needs to be a big enough, sustainable, regular market of advertising to come through, and I don't think that exists yet. So that leaves us with one more possibility, which would be if we could swap over some of our print readers for tablet readers and count them on our overall ABC certificate. I think we'd be really interested in that. The way the rule set, and it's a reasonably complex rule set, exists at ABC, we're not able to do that as yet with a free product. So I think at the moment, whilst I've got a whole bunch of really enthusiastic, absolutely brilliant people back at the ranch who would love to be playing, with iPad versions of what we do, I can see the cost, but I can't quite see the revenue, and therefore I can't see the profit yet. But I know what the three problems are, and if conditions change across any of those, if advertisers become more committed to regular sustainable advertising, if the rule set changes around ABC, or if we were to change our minds and decide that we were happy to charge consumers for what we do, then I think that would give us a route in.
I've got another question, if that's fine. Do you think your free print model would come in direct competition with like the normal paid for consumer model in any near future, or?
I suspect we probably complement the marketplaces where we are. So Shortlist launched into a men's market which was already in decline. It continued to decline. Stylist launched into a much more vibrant women's marketplace, much bigger marketplace, and that continues to be a vibrant and growing marketplace. So I think we sit alongside the rest of the market, and in our case at the centre of the markets, rather than necessarily putting anybody out of business.
Okay. Over there.
Hi, this is a question for James, actually. I just wonder, since you're no longer delineating between print and digital, how easily and well have the marketing strategies that you used to use in print, or perhaps still use in print, adapted to the digital? I mean, if you had to retrain your marketing staff, are the same people doing it, and do the same basic principles apply, do you think?
Some of them do, but one of the points I'd like to make is lumping digital together is not a particularly good thing to do, because building a website based around, say, Google search optimization is a completely different marketing proposition to launching an app. We've got totally different metrics. So with, in answer to your question, no, they've all got different plans, because SEO is at the heart of our Google-based sites, whilst for apps, it's a hits business. If you're not on the top 10 within a week, you're probably going to struggle. So all our marketing is all about getting in the top 10 in the first week. PR, marketing, it's a sort of blitzkrieg, for want of a better word. So no, we've completely got separate strategies for each development, but we do, again, when we talk about digital, we don't talk about digital, we just talk about apps, we talk about websites, we talk about print, and they've got completely different approaches.
What about social media? Just sort of extending on to that, there's a recent survey out from the Institute of Marketing about, I think, suggesting that under 25% of brand owners can see any tangible payback from their involvement in social media, yet are thoroughly committed to it. But Adrian, sort of from a B2B point of view, more limited, I would have thought. But where's your sort of social media?
Oh no, social media is becoming an increasingly important part of what we do. And in fact, one of the things that we did very recently, and slightly controversially, was to part company with the ABC as our auditors, and we have signed up with PricewaterhouseCoopers, who also audit the FT. And part of the reason for that was that we wanted an audit to reflect our entire audience, and that includes online as well as print, but also our social media audience. And that's growing on Facebook and on Twitter and on LinkedIn and so on. And we very much see people who engage with us on those platforms as being as important potentially to us, perhaps in a different way to our paying subscribers, but they are part of the community and part of the people that we now regard ourselves as serving. And Paul plays that idea of us being, to use another buzz phrase, platform agnostic.
Okay, Mike, social media for Shortlist?
Critically important. And it's interesting because we've learned a huge amount about just exactly how to engage, how to not exploit the users that you have, and I think we've got to a point now where I couldn't tell you exactly how much traffic. I think it differs by site, but I would guess at around about 15% of our overall traffic from Shortlist and about 20% from Stylist comes from social media sources. So it's a really significant, and these are people that come back and back and back. So we're in a powerful position because we have good, valuable pieces of content, which we use social media as a route to distribute, and then we get all of that traffic back and we monetize it when it sits on our site.
So it's social media as a traffic builder and a funnel to bring people in.
Yeah. It's a really, really major part of that. It's also a brilliant early warning system when you're doing something wrong. And I think there's you can look at social media as being something that's a kind of a positive on your balance sheet, but actually I think it stops a whole bunch of negatives as well.
Right.
You pick up on problems really quickly. You're able to deal with them in a way which is far more personal. You've not got somebody's frustration and anxiety and anger building over a piece of bad service, over weeks and weeks as they send you a letter and then complain to all of their friends they still haven't heard anything back, and then it goes to the organisation, and then they get a letter back 6 weeks later, at which point they've put off every one of their friends from ever dealing with you. With social media, you find out about those problems, you deal with them really quickly, and you end up with really satisfied customers. They're satisfied because you've dealt with them. I think these are incredibly powerful tools, and I think you have to put them at the heart of your business.
Right. I mean, do you think, perhaps going to James, that to try and engineer a transaction within a social media environment, that you're banging your head against a brick wall, that's pushing social media too far, that it is this traffic builder, this contact point to drive people in, pull people in?
No, I suppose there's no reason. I mean, Facebook stores haven't been particularly successful, have they? So maybe people aren't quite prepared to transact on Facebook yet. But I agree with what the other two panellists, what Adrian and Mike said. It depends on the brand. It's a traffic driver for some of our sites. For some of our sites, it's an early warning system. For some of our sites, it's a useful metric for advertisers. You know, it's just an audience, and it's how you tap into that audience. And I don't think just saying, yes, we've got a social media strategy is enough. I think per brand you need a social media strategy. And per brand, your social media strategy might be, we're not going to do it. We're not going to bother. It may be not worth it for that brand. So again, we've got no catch-all about it, really.
Okay, fine. We're running out of time, so one final question for each of you, unless there's a burning question from the audience. But a final question. There is, reading in between the lines, there is a sense from the Publishing Futures survey that smaller publishers are a bit nervous about the whole future. Is this, and publishing, is this a large publisher's game, or are there still opportunities for the smaller publisher? Adrian, I mean, coming from a fairly sort of hefty organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And funnily enough, I mean, we've one of the things I've been involved with over the last couple of years is disposing of print titles that no longer fit into our strategy and are rather sort of orphans. You know, they're not part of communities that we can effectively build. But the people we've sold them to, you know, clearly see a future for those titles. And you know, I think, you know, that in this environment where the barriers to entry are as low as they've ever been, probably for 200 years, I think it's very possible for someone who's smart, who's got the right business model, to come along and do things differently, to innovate, and be very successful. And there's a guy sitting to my right who's done just that. So, you know, if I was a small publisher and I had something new to add, you know, I would be feeling as confident on one hand and as nervous on the other as anyone in a large company. I don't think size really matters in terms of whether you're going to be successful over the next 5 years. Certainly in the B2B world, I think it's about being clever, being ingenious, having original ideas, and finding ways to create winning value propositions, and that applies at whatever scale of business you've got.
Thank you. Mike, are you a small publisher? Does size matter to you?
Oh, we're a small to medium-sized enterprise, apparently. You know, listen, I would agree with James. I think that the scale in this argument it's the wrong argument to have. I think this is about attitude, and I think there are only two places worth being in terms of mindset if you are a media company, if you're a publishing company. Either the incumbent, in which you are big and powerful and you can smash other people out of existence, or insurgent, in which you are quick and nimble and you can build a business in that way. And you get good examples of good big businesses and bad examples of big businesses, and good examples of small businesses and bad examples of small businesses. I think it's about how you set yourself up, and when you're a smaller player, it's combining everything that you possibly can and multiplying it so that you can use whatever strength you've got, as well as being nimble. And when you're a big player, it's about having a heart of insurgency, about questioning in a constructive way the whole time about what you're doing, and trying to reduce the number of levels of hierarchy within your business so that you can move really, really quickly and only play the big points. So I think this is about attitude rather than anything else. I think if you have the right attitude, then you can build a big business regardless of where your starting point is.
Okay, and a final thought, James? It's all about attitude?
I think that is very, very important. I agree with Mike on that. We're doing a brand launch at the moment. It's not a web-only launch. It's not a print-only launch. It's just a launch. And actually, having been in publishing, 20 years now, it's nothing like I've ever seen before. We're starting with a pool of content, and we're saying we've got some great content here. How can we make money from it? We're not even thinking about, you know, should we have a magazine? Should we have an iPad app? We're just saying, where can we make the most money from that audience, and where can we attract advertisers? And that is very, very different to what we did even 5 years ago. You just sat down with a business plan and worked out your copy sale, your subs rate, and just if you continue down that road, if you're a medium-sized publisher or a small publisher, you're probably buggered, if I'm honest, because you are then competing with some really big scale issues. You've just got to take what you're good at, and as you say, people bought some of your magazines and said that's a great audience. If we just did this, and this with it, we'll make some more money. And there's always that opportunity. But I think the idea of thinking that print remains your sole focus and you're a small player is going to get very, very tough for you. Because actually the one thing that's going to decline really quickly is the physical newsstand. And I have a fairly doom and gloom prediction about that in 3 years' time it'll be half the size it is now. And a lot of small publishers depend on the physical newsstand for their sales. Don't think you're going to have that ability in 3 years' time. So it is going to get quite tough.
Thank you. And on that bombshell, we close our panel session. Please thank our panel for their openness and honesty. Thank you.